Hello and welcome to Views on News. I am Jawad Tehami. Pakistan's Prime Minister Mohammad Shehbaz Sharif has chaired a finance ministry meeting, and he has instructed to present a comprehensive plan to increase the revenue without burdening the common people. And the Prime Minister is also advised to expedite the process of reforms and privatization of the state-owned enterprises and the loss-making ones in particular. We also know for a fact that the World Bank, in its latest Pakistan Development Update, fiscal impact of the federal state-owned enterprises says that the high fiscal costs of the federal state-owned enterprises and this critical reform needed to improve their performance, efficiency and governance, including via privatizations. Also, we know that Finance Minister Muhammad Aurangzeb had earlier talked about privatization, particularly of the loss-making Pakistan International Airlines. Now, according to some reports, the Privatization Commission is devising a three-phase strategy to privatize state-owned entities, barring those considered of national or strategic importance. And also, we had seen the kind of statement that was released after the second and the final review of the standby arrangement between Pakistani authorities and the IMF team. The statement talked about advancing the SOE reforms to improve the sector's performance and also underscored the necessity of enhancing the efficiency of the state-owned enterprises regardless of the ownership. Also, the World Bank data in its report has talked about the profitability of the state-owned enterprises in Pakistan, which had been declining and turning into losses for about a decade. Now, it says, let me quote, that the profitability of Pakistan's federally state-owned enterprises is the lowest in South Asian region. The aggregate profit at 0.8% of GDP in 2014 turned into losses worth 0.4% of GDP in 2020. We'll be specifically talking about the viability of the state-owned enterprises and the kind of reforms to better their governance which is required, as the authorities are seeking that one also. Additionally, Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif has also instructed the Ministry of Commerce to enhance the export sector and also to double the country's exports in the next 5 years. He has instructed the Ministry of Commerce to present a comprehensive plan in that particular regard, particularly focusing on the information technology sector, household products, textiles, and other unique sectors. All these matters are for discussion in today's show. For that, we are honored to have been joined in the studio by Dr. Shujat Farooq. He is Chief of Research, Pakistan Institute of Development Economics. Dr. Farooq, thank you very much for your time, for being with us on the show tonight. We really appreciate that. Also, in the studio, we are honored to have been joined by Dr. Manzoor Ahmad. He is Member Task Force on FPR and Tax Reforms, also former ambassador at the World Trade Organization. Dr. Ahmad, thank you very much for your time, also for being with us on the show tonight. We really appreciate that. Now, let me begin the discussion with you, Dr. Farooq. Now, when we talk about the loss-making state-owned enterprises and the kind of data the World Bank gives about the profitability, which has reduced in the last one decade in particular, your overall understanding about the loss-making state-owned enterprises here in Pakistan?
Jawad sahab, if we look the state-owned enterprises right now, there are 206 state-owned enterprises that are controlled by the federal government, and including out of these 206, there are around 88 commercial entities. And most of these commercial entities are in power sector, financial sector, like for example railway. You can see infrastructure projects like NHA, oil and gas, and you know that NHA is a big consumer of PSTP budget, because lot of budget 70% go to the infrastructure projects. So if we look, yes, absolutely, most of them are in loss. For example, look at, like for example, power sector. Despite that, we make certain, that reforms in the power sector, we distribute generation, distribution and transmission. But still, you know that the distribution side, we have around 10 discos right now, but still they are not run on the commercial basis, and government is owning that. And if you look the last year data, there are 550 billion losses only in the power sector. Again, for example, look at the railway. Currently, railways revenues are around 37 billion, but you know that only the pension liability of the railway, that is 41 billion. So these sort of, for example, same could be with PIA, that there is quite overemployment in all these sectors. So absolutely right now, around 1.5 trillion to 2 trillion losses that are incurred by these.
It's a very important point that you've just made about that particular element of pension that is associated with these particular state-owned enterprises, particularly when you mention of railways and Pakistan International Airlines. Now, thinking on those lines, once going towards the privatization, how this particular element of pension would be addressed once these state-owned enterprises would be privatized?
There could be certain model through which you can manage these pensions. One could be that, okay, because these enterprises also hold certain assets. For example, look at Pakistan Steel Mill, look at Pakistan Railway. They have lot of assets, lot of lands. So you have to consult with the provinces, because it fall in the federal legislative list part 2. And in consultation with provinces, you can transfer certain assets to the private sector. For example, same you can see in PIA, there are around, I think, 800 billion liabilities of the PIA, and again PIA also hold the assets. So we have certain successful examples like HBL, although in HBL and in PTCL, they were certain profit organization, but that model can be implemented. And even for example, you can defer these payments over. For example, you can give the grace period to the private owners who will definitely own these enterprises. Like for example, when the motorway was built in 1998, the Korean company, they made the investment, and we give them grace period, and in this grace period, you know that they
for a simpler understanding of the common people, when it comes to that particular element of doing away with pension element of once and for all, once these state-owned enterprises are going for privatization, how to do that particular thing?
I think you know that let's sell their assets. Give them certain golden handshake scheme, as we did in the PTCL, as we did in the HBL, and creating certain one-time, you know, that incentive for the workers, and certain workers can be, you know, that they can be transferred to the, you know, that the private sector. For example, in PTCL, you know, that they give certain gold handshake scheme, but they own, for example, you know, that 30 to 40% of the employment, and you know that all the workers are not inefficient. We may say that, okay, 50 to 60% are inefficient, so you have to manage that. And second thing is that, for example, right now we are incurring, you know, that 1.5 to 2 trillion per annum. Why not, okay, we incur this amount and give incentive to the workers, and in this way we can get rid from these workers.
Right, Dr. Ahmad, now the data that has been shared by Dr. Farooq, 206 state-owned enterprises, 88 happen to be commercial. Now, as per your understanding, as per your findings, how many of these 206, including those 88 commercial, are the loss-making state-owned enterprises here?
Well, I would not be able to give you a number, but what I can say is that, for example, you know, in the transportation sector, like we all know about PIA, and where the government is in business, like steel mill, and like energy distribution, energy transmission, all these are in losses, and they are the biggest losses. I mean, I can understand if national highways are those things, because they are for public good. That's all right, because once they're building road, that's the period on which they can recover is a long period. But these, and the other thing is that the government, for example, after this devolution, federal government should pass on this to the provinces, you know, because they get more share of the national collection than previously. So instead of keeping these loss making with themselves, and provincial government can have a better control also. For example, you know, you have this electric supply company in Peshawar, Hyderabad, some of these, because federal government is very difficult for them. So if they pass them on that side, that could. But the other thing is that they should not go on for years and years putting money. That's not a solution. I mean, for example, you know, steel mills has been closed from 2015, I think. It's now 8-9 years, and they're just putting money. I mean, like what I think some other countries did. Once they stop making money, they just privatize them. You know, whatever they can sell off, but they sell them off the government books. So that's what I feel.
Now, there is an element of pension that has been mentioned by Dr. Farooq earlier. Is that the major cause of the state-owned enterprises going into losses, or what are the other major associated causes of those?
Well, I mean, that is one of the causes, but then there's other causes. If you are running a, you know, for example, steel mill or PIA, and you are, you know, you have over employment. I mean, you know, if you have 10 times more people compared to another airline, so obviously you're not going to, your expenses are going to be much more. So that's another thing. But then because they're government things, so if say power transmission, if the losses are 17-18%, and if you know, so that's rather high compared to the others. But if we compare it, say, like banks were at one time, they were giving loans to these big connected people and then writing them off. And once they were privatized, that thing is gone. I mean, it's no more. Now the banks are earning big profits, and many of the banks, government itself is shareholder, so that gains from there. And also they pay very high taxes. So twice it gains. So instead of keeping it and trying to, this doesn't work. I mean, if there is something essential, maybe I can understand if the government has to do exploration, like oil and gas exploration, or things like that, where private sector finds it difficult unless you get some foreign investment, etc. So those are understandable. But running an airline, running all these industries, etc., that's not for government.
So how to do away with that element of pension? I mean, the kind of solutions which have been recommended by Dr. Farooq.
I mean, in some other countries, what they do is they have these pension funds, which are run by private institutions. So those pension funds, they invest in a way that those pension funds makes money, so that over time the pension fund doesn't go down. Here, there is no system. There's nothing to fund those pension, because the government just spends. I mean, so I think just follow any good example from any other country. Yes.
Right, Dr. Farooq, when we talk about another finding that has been shared by the World Bank, that Pakistan state-owned enterprises tend to have low investment rates. What sense do you make out of this? Low investment rates. Do we understand that if we are going for the privatization of a certain particular entity that is owned by the state, so how would you expect investment happening in that? And what does that particular low investment rate depict?
I will come later to investment side. I will add further, you know, that one could be the pension, but I think there are certain other questions. If we see the data, one element is still that government is giving too much subsidies in this sector. For example, you see that around 1500 billion, despite of losses on one side, okay, they are incurring the losses, but on other side we are giving them too much subsidies, you know, that to run that. Another element is that is, I think, even big issue, and that is outstanding guarantees that government has committed, because whenever PIA have taken the loan, NHA have taken the loan, or discos have taken the loan, and this amount is 4.5% of GDP. So definitely this amount is, if you calculate it, it would be around 20 billion to 25 billion dollar. So so you know that, for example, if we privatize the PIA, one could be the pension. That is not a big chunk, but the major chunk is that, for example, that the guarantees that PIA have taken the loan. So you know that, now I will come toward the investment side. Look, you know that overall in Pakistan, you know that investment is not too big. Over the last 5 decades, our investment to GDP ratio, that is just 13%, because we are not saving too much. One thing is that we are not saving, so that's why investment is not coming. Other factor is that most of these companies, they are not listed on the stock market, because you know that you have 2 options to borrow. One option is that okay, let's list these companies on the stock market and let gather the money from the public, that they purchase the share, and in this way you get the revenue and you invest. But unfortunately this is not coming. So that's why government have to give subsidies. So government is owning this SOE baby over the last you know that many of years. The third factor is that okay, why private sector is not emerging? You know that private sectors will always calculate the cost benefit analysis. For example, they
That's exactly the point that I was coming
so they
on.
calculated the cost benefit analysis, and they purchased the HBL, they purchased you know that PTCL, and they might be willing to purchase, like for example National Bank, etc. But you know that, for example, when they say the PIA, when they say the discos, or for example you know that NHA, so you know that they will see that okay, there is pension bump, there are lot of outstanding liabilities. So that is a major constraint. And you know that investment, why the investment would come then? When bureaucrats, they would run the business. For example, if I am for example, look at PESCO and look at GAPCO. GAPCO losses are just 10 billion in 1 year. On the other hand, PESCO losses are around 250 billion. So there is no incentive to GAPCO, and there is no penalty to PESCO, because government employees are there. Same could be the utility store. For example, every year we are injecting some 15 billion to 20 billion amount. But you know that utility store is a commercial business. But this is the store that closed at 5 o'clock at evening. The store remained closed at Saturday and Sunday. So ultimately there would be losses.
Right. So Dr. Ahmad, your understanding as to the investment, the cost benefit analysis that is associated with it. For example, a number of entities mentioned by Dr. Farooq earlier, for example, the National Bank or any bank for that matter. And when we're talking about the liabilities which are associated with others, such as the PIA or the other related entities belonging to state.
I think you know, if it's a loss-making entity, and if it is going to be run in the same way as it was previously, I don't think anybody is going to invest. But on the other hand, if you want to attract investment, then if you give management control, like we did in case of PTCL, you know, maybe we just privatized 26%, but gave the management control. So it attracted a lot of investment. So this is the only way. I mean, you know, if the private investor is sure that it's not the government going to run, but they will get this management, so they may go.
So improving the efficiency or bringing the better governance in a state-owned enterprises, is privatization the only solution for that matter?
Well, it's not the only solution, but this is a preferred solution. Other solutions are public-private partnership. Sometimes, you know, both run together. But the privatization is the best solution, I think, for the government.
Right. So if going for the second option, of course, you mentioned it is the preferred solution when it comes to this loss-making state-owned enterprises, the privatization of it. If the second choice is taken up, that is going towards the public-private partnership, how does it actually function?
Oh, it would make a difference, because if it's purely government-owned and government appoints somebody, then that particular person, whichever political party or something, you know, they can just use it as an employment agency, and that starts losing money, you know, like we saw in PIA or steel mill or other things. So if there's some other management from outside, if it's a public-private partnership, okay, but you give it to private people to run it, I think it will be.
So in that sort of a scenario, there is a percentage of it that
It
is
depends how they
given?
negotiate. It could be, you know, sometimes 49%, 51%, 26%. In case of PDC, it was 26%. Some others, I think they just have given some berths, you know, at Karachi port, and they're just about giving. They're in the process of negotiating. I think they've not yet done it. Airports at Islamabad and Karachi and all. Maybe there'll be. I don't know what the percentage they've agreed, but there, yeah.
Outsourcing the airports, what does that actually mean? And that the percentage of it becomes crucial to understand about it. Isn't it so?
Yes, but it's not unusual. For example, you see Heathrow Airport, one of the world's biggest airport, and it's, I think it's 3 or 4. I think some shares are held by Qataris, some by Saudis, maybe some Chinese as well. Some 40% is outside. So it's not something we are doing something unusual, because these they run airports or ports throughout the world. They know how to do it, you know, in a professional manner.
Right, Dr. Farooq. Now, which is the solution that you prefer the most, either complete privatization or the public-private partnership?
You know that in a Pakistan scenario, I would prefer for complete privatization. Why? First, it is not the job of government to do business, because you know that, for example, you know that we have a lot of regulations. Like, for example, right now, if you calculate the government footprint in economy, that is around 70%. So government is present everywhere. You can see, for example, if there is fertilizer market, government is injecting 200 billion. If wheat market, again government is injecting money. Utility stores are there. But all these, you know that they are not making efficiency. So for example, if you go in West, government role is to strengthen the regulatory framework and let the market to work. So I would suggest that let's go toward the complete privatization, because you know that there is a lot of politicization as well. For example, you know that in PIA, in, for example, railway, there are lot of overemployment only due to, you know, that political elite that during their tenure they have injected lot of employment. So if you will go in public-private partnership, again this government footprint that will remain. So and you know that second could be that, for example, you know that in our industry, despite that we are giving too much subsidies. For example, go look at in textile sector, we are giving subsidy. There is GPS state, you know that from the European countries, but still we are not competing. So let's get rid from this subsidy culture and rent seeking culture, and government should go back and let the private sector that.
Okay, so public going for the public-private partnership, despite certain limitations which you've just mentioned, these two solutions remain to be the most viable. Is there anything else other than going for complete privatization and the public-private partnership to better the governance in a state-owned enterprise?
Even you can opt the hybrid model, and it depends on industry to industry. For example, you know that if we look the profitability, there are certain companies like, for example, in Ogra, in exploration development, in gas sector, they are earning lot of profit. So here you know that where we have certain SOEs where we are running, you know that the profit. Let's invite the private sector, like for example Islamabad airport outsourcing, and let give, you know that the management, the governance structure to the private sector, so they work efficiently. So some public-private partnership can be workable. Same, for example, in NHA, you know that NHA is a big beneficiary of PSDB budget. So again, you know that because they don't have the business plan. For example, M2 was developed in late 90s, but you know that still there is no business plan that how we incur its cost. So again, you know that it can go in profitability where we invite the private sector, and you know that there are successful examples where private sector is coming, they are investing, they are extending the infrastructure. So it's some sort of hybrid model that.
Is there any sort of a possibility, rather than going for privatization or the public-private partnership, or rather a hybrid model, the state-owned enterprises remain in the hands of the authorities, yet there could be any possibility of enhancing their performance, efficiency, and bettering their governance?
I don't think so. I don't think so, because you know that we are running these enterprises from more than 50 years, and even some of them we are owning them for more than 70 years. So again, you know that most of the authorities, for example, I evaluated the utility stores. You know that utility stores were established in early 70s, I think in 1973. With passage of time, liabilities are rising and revenues are shrinking, and even you can see the enterprises, so loss is increasing because government is injecting more subsidies, loss are most emerging, and most of these organizations, they are running just like bureaucratic structure without any business plan. So until we don't have the business plan, you know that and for business plan, you know that you require very strong willpower and very strong, you know that government support. For example, you know that, for example, whenever you start to think that okay, let's privatize the PIA, you know that there are a lot of school of thought they emerge that okay, no, we can make it efficient, let's go to the public private partnership. So I think this is no more that we can.
Right, Dr. Ahmad, is there any other possibility other than privatization, hybrid model, or public private partnership, still keeping those state-owned enterprises in the hands of the authorities and bringing in reforms or trying to overhaul them and perhaps going towards better governance? Is that a possibility also?
I mean, say in some countries like Sweden or Norway, where you know they can have some excellent managers, independent of ministers, completely independent, so that can work. But in case of Pakistan, for example, I was at one time at Steel Mills board of governors there, and I saw that when a very good manager came, he could do those reforms for 2, 3 years, 4 years, and they cut some people and do all whatever, try to sell products at a higher rate, etc. And it worked. But whenever, so next time, and if he doesn't listen to the political government of the day, then his contract is not renewed. So another person comes, and so we are back to. So in the long run, I think these are the two models. Either you have full privatization or public-private partnership.
Right. So your preferred solution is complete privatization in case of Pakistan. So once going towards complete privatization, what likely challenges arise on the way towards complete privatization?
You see, we should look at banks. I mean, in many cases, it wasn't complete. It wasn't sold out 100%. Some were, but maybe in many cases they were not. And so the government kept some share, but government is out of running those banks, except through regulatory authority like the state bank, but that's nothing to do with the day-to-day functioning of the banks. So something similar here. I mean, so the government is out of their management, etc. That can work. That's the only way it can work. But in the long run, it doesn't work. I mean, keeping government control doesn't work.
On the way to privatization, what challenges arise and how to address them, Dr. Farooq?
You know that we have state-owned enterprise TRIG 2021. We have already legislation on it, and you know that we established privatization commission in 1991. I think we just require a willpower. And we privatize lot of organizations, lot of that entities. So model exists, and you know that these state-owned enterprises, they are not pure government entity. They are autonomous bodies. So on autonomous bodies, you know that the rules not applicable as like public servants. So there are 2 to 3, I think, challenges when we will do the privatization. One is that the government, there are a lot of loans, and where government is obligatory through given its guarantees. So I have told you that this amount is 4.5% of GDP, and this is around $20 to $25 billion. Second, that is the unfunded pension liability, because right now there are certain organizations where there is no pension. For example, that in utility store and various other industries, there is no pension liability. But there are certain organizations like, for example, railway, like PIA, there are certain pension liabilities. So pension liability, that is another thing. And third, you know that so these are two, I think.
So what about, as you already mentioned in your first take, overemployment?
Yeah.
I mean, when a new entity is coming in, the management will be looking forward to have the overhaul. And when it comes to sieving out the right human resource also, many of the people would be becoming naturally redundant from those particular jobs they were holding earlier. Does that happen to be a challenge on the way to privatization also?
Absolutely, that is a challenge. For example, you can see certain, you know, that union bodies in these organizations. For example, in PIA, you can see few unions like, for example, pilot associations, other worker associations, same is in railway, same is, for example, in other organizations. So definitely there would be a pressure. And you know that there are certain...
Shouldn't that be naturally a concern, because at the end of the day, people are going to lose jobs? And that's going to add a burden to the government's understanding of how to, you know, deal with that particular challenge also.
Yeah, Jawad, this is the burden, but you know that you have to taken the broader cost benefit analysis. For example, on one side, for example, if we are just getting you know that loss of 4-5 trillion, and on the other side, if benefits are too narrow, so you know that, and you know that, look at the employment, for example, size. For example, these employment in these organization, that could be just 2% of the total employment. So that is not a big, and you know that always, you know that there are transition in the economy. For example, you know that we are in a IT period, so lot of technology is emerging. Okay, people are getting unemployed and they are adjusting in other sectors, so definitely they would adjust. So if government, you know that they create a pension fund, and through which you give them certain handsome amount, and okay, you say that okay, for example, you know that, for example, I was studying that even in FBR, for example, there are lot of overemployment, and that is around 55 to 60%.
Right, Dr. Ahmad, how to deal with that particular? Of course, at the end of the day, many people would be going back home, losing their jobs. Of course, that is going to be naturally a concern for the government of the day also. How to address that particular thing? How to go about it?
Yeah, well, this is a big concern, but there were similar concerns when banks were being privatized, because these people were thinking that they will lose their job. Some did lose their job, but once the banks became profitable, they were jobs in some other way. Instead of normal having too many clerks giving money, so they put that into the ATM machines and hired some other higher skilled people, you know, who can do other things. So I mean, this is unfortunate, but that's and this is the biggest challenge when they try to privatize. So these unions, as Dr. Shah is saying, they create big problem. It's not just the unions; it's some political parties are committed. So they don't allow it. Then you get these stay orders from the courts. So there are many problems. But once the government decides, it has happened in many countries. Once the government decides, they are able to do it. You know, there are these challenges.
Is there any viable formula in that particular sort of a case when some people are going to naturally lose the jobs? They could be compensated against that particular loss.
Well, normally they do.
Up to their satisfaction also.
Yes. Normally they do.
Of course, it's going to be a concern, naturally should be a concern for the government of the day. They just can't overlook that particular problem.
Yes, normally there's a golden handshake formula which is offered to the employees, and many people take that because, you know, okay, they say there's so much money and they think maybe I can do some business, something. So the government will have to, you just can't one day fire them and say you from tomorrow you don't come. You'll have to find, and in many other countries what they do is they try to retrain them for some other jobs, which may be difficult here, but you know, but the easiest way is that you pay them, maybe pay them some salary for, because now, for example, take steel mills. So it's closed from 2016. So and we are still paying them for people to come. They could have done this then at the time, closed it, and they say, okay, you get your salary, sit home, you get your salaries for the next 4 years, 5 years. And I think the people would have happily left.
Okay, so there was an expression of enhancing the efficiency as per that particular statement after the second and the final review of the standby arrangement between Pakistani authorities and the International Monetary Fund team. who've recently been over here. Now, also we have seen the statement coming from the new Finance Minister, Mr. Mohammad Aurangzeb, regarding looking forward to have a bigger and a longer IMF program for at least 3 years. He hasn't talked about that size in the amount of that particular money that is going to come with that, but at least for 3 years now. Now, after that particular statement, during the final review of that standby arrangement, now enhancing the efficiency, how much a newer program or a larger or longer program with the IMF and the Pakistani authorities is going to pivot around this particular portion of enhancing the governance and bringing in efficiency of the state-owned enterprises is concerned?
There are two elements. You know that one element is that that is our arrangement with the IMF, where we are looking that let's manage a 3 to 4 year program where we get some $6 to $7 billion from the IMF, and then when IMF would come, then definitely there will be certain bilateral arrangement, because you know that lot of countries they are associated with the IMF program. So right now, you know that our annual requirement that is around $20 billion to finance, you know that our debt, to finance our fiscal deficit, and to finance our exports and external deficits. So that is one thing that where we are looking certain. On the other side, you know that as you have mentioned that we have to work on certain structural adjustment through which we have to promote efficiency. IMF cannot do that, we have to do. So you know that risks are all there. For example, there is excessive government borrowing. So first thing is that we have to control this government borrowing. Second, you know that our policy, as you know that Dr. Manzoor said, that for example privatization will bring certain efficiency. So right now lot of government footprint that is creating uncertainty in the economy. So when there would be certainty through the policies, definitely it will build the business confidence, and it will, you know, that inject inflows both investment from the outside as well as the domestic side. The third is that, for example, you know that we have to work on the climate vulnerabilities. Right now, for example, we face certain flood, and we face certain shocks, and you know that smoke is another challenge. So these climate vulnerabilities, they are our hazard in the future. So definitely these governance reforms that should emerge from the government. And as you have mentioned at the start, that Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif, they have asked that let's build a comprehensive plan. So rather than, you know, that IMF plan right now, definitely it will bring certain challenges. There could be inflation, there could be core inflation, because prices will go up, energy, electricity, etc. But on the other side, we have to make certain reforms that give us sustained results, through which we can control our borrowing, control our expenditures, and boost our revenues.
Right. Dr. Ahmad, how much the approval of the new larger and longer IMF program is going to pivot around regarding the efficiency in the governance of state-owned enterprises?
I think that's an important part. I mean, normally there are some other factors, but 3 or 4 things are always. One is state-owned enterprises, because a lot of money is going in there, and IMF always worried that you take our money and then you subsidize this. That's one. The second is energy sector. The losses and circular debts, etc. We have to reform that. These are 2. The third thing is, I think that we should do some reforms so that our exports start growing. They have been stagnant for the last many years. Now what the problem is, if we take loan and another 4 year pass and we don't do anything, then we forever will be going for more and more loans. So those 3 or 4 years that we take, so from already I think the government is quite conscious of this, and they're doing it, but sometimes they slow down because of some public resentment, etc.
Right.
So they have to, it would be tough, but they have to carry out those reforms.
You mentioned one point regarding the enhancement of exports. Now, Prime Minister has also talked about creating an action plan. He's instructed the Ministry of Commerce to bring in a comprehensive action plan to double the country's exports in the next 5 years, doubling the country's exports in next 5 years. Broader contours of that particular strategy or those measures to be put in place that could ideally bring us to that particular level of doubling the exports in the next 5?
I think 2 or 3 are very essential steps. One, our the current customs tariff, you know, is there's a lot of anti-export bias. In the presence of this tariff, the industries prefer to sell within the domestic market rather than export. So that will need to be radically overhauled, as other countries have done. You know, the current tariff will not in that way. The other thing is that if our trade facilitation, for example, a container takes 10 days at Karachi port, and in some other country it just is 1 hour is cleared. So the costs really go up. So these are 2 very essential points. And then there are many other subsidies, but these are the 2 basic points which relate to policies. If they improve the policies, and you don't really have to spend that much money. For example, otherwise, if you like to give them energy at a cheaper cost, etc., then you have to subsidize. But for these, you just have to change the laws as others have done.
Right, Dr. Farooq, your last quick comments regarding doubling the exports in the next 5 years, as has been instructed by the Prime Minister to the Ministry of Commerce.
I think in our this doubling of export plan, first we have to focus from shifting right now our export strategy from hardware to software. So for example, we are seeing that okay, we will export rice, we will export certain leather products. So let's move toward the IT products, let's move toward the manufacturing products and those products where we can do value addition. And there are 2 to 3 things as Dr. Manzoor mentioned, that first we have to rationalize trade tariffs. Second, let's lower down the cost, especially for the export firms. Third, let's sit with the exporters, ask them what sort of challenges you are facing. For example, if they are facing certain, duty challenges, in raw material challenges, so rather than giving the general subsidy to entire industry, let us ask the exporter that okay, if a firm, for example, it is exporting a sector $1 billion, let's ask that okay, you have to push to $3 to $4 billion. What sort of subsidies are incentives? So give them incentives and especially give them facilitation.
Dr. Shujat Farooq, Chief of Research at the Pakistan Institute of Development Economics, thank you very much for joining in at Views on News tonight. Really appreciate that. Dr. Manzoor Ahmad, Member Task Force on FPR and Tax Reforms, former Ambassador to the World Trade Organization. Thank you very much for your time, also for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. With that, we come to the end of today's episode. Till the next one, take good care of yourselves.